Welcome to God Talk. I'm JC. This is your daily Bible study over what we read earlier, Genesis 39, 40, 41, and Luke 16. So it starts off in 39 with Joseph and his wife. Now the Ishmaelites had taken Joseph to Egypt and sold him to Potiphar, one of the king's officers, who was basically the captain of the palace guard. And during this time, Joseph was very successful. He lived a lifestyle that was reverent to God. He was aware of God, and he did everything that was pleasing apparently under God's eyes. He was successful at everything he did. And so what happened is the palace guard, the captain of the palace guard, decided to put him in charge of everything, right? So he was put in charge of his house and everything he owned. From then on, because of Joseph, the Lord blessed the household. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian and everything that he had in his house and in his fields. So because Joseph started working for him, then this guy, as captain guard, started noticing that everything was becoming in abundance, started getting blessed. So he decided to put Joseph in charge of everything because he was, a very trustworthy and very honorable person, right? During this time, and Joseph's apparently he's a well-built man and he's good looking. And after a while, his master's wife starts to desire him, right? So Joseph's, going through this whole conflict with his master's wife, saying, "Look, I've been given charge over everything that my master has except for you. The only thing he's held back from me is you. I wouldn't want to dishonor God and decide to do anything with you." And then she's just like, just kind of just coming on to him. She wants it. You know what I mean? She's pretty adamant about getting some Joseph. You know what I mean? And he's asking day and day, and he tells her, like, how can I do such an immoral sin against God? And she just, he wouldn't do it. Well, one day, he went to the house to do work, and no one else was there. It was just him and her, right? And she basically tried to grab him and force her way on him. She grabbed him by his robe, tried to force herself on him, and then he just like slipped off the robe and took off, right? But one day when Joseph went into the house to do his work, none of the house servants were there. She caught him by his robe and said, "Come to bed with me." But he escaped and ran outside, leaving his robe in her hand. When she saw that he had left his robe and ran out of the house, she called to her house servant and said, "Look at this." So then automatically she starts crying wolf, right? She starts complaining, "Hey, this guy tried to insult me. He tried to rape me, this and that. Look, I even got his robe. He took off when I started screaming. Just trying to shun his name. You know what I mean?" So after this, the master came home and she pretty much told the same lie to him. She says, "Then she told him the same story. The Hebrew slave that you brought here came into my room and insulted me. But when I screamed, he ran out, leaving his robe beside me." And so Joseph's master was furious. He was pretty mad. Obviously, he's going to believe his wife. But the Lord was with Joseph, so he decided to go ahead and give him put him in prison, right, where all the king's prisoners were kept. So during this process, he was still an honorable and blessed man, right? And so because of that, the jailer was pleased with him, the guy that pretty much ran the jail. So he decides to go ahead and make him the head prisoner there and help him run and have responsibilities for everything that was done in the prison. The jailer didn't have to look after anything because Joseph was responsible and he was an honest, God-fearing man. Because the Lord was with them, he succeeded in everything he did. That's awesome, right? So Genesis 40 goes and tells us that later there was this. Okay, this is where Joseph interprets the prisoner's dreams, right? So there's two prisoners. There's a wine steward and a baker. Both of them have some kind of little setback with the king, right, or some kind of dispute. Okay, and both of them get sentenced to prison for a few days at the same time. And all of it was so that I guess the king was going to just figure out what he wanted to do. Maybe he wanted to do a little research or homework on whatever evidence or whatever he needed that he convict them before he would sentence their punishment, right? And so they're sitting there in prison, and basically one of the guys, which is the wine steward, okay, he basically says he has this dream, and Joseph's sitting right there, and he's like, hey, why do you look so worried? And the wine guy's like, hey, man, I just had this dream. You know what I mean? And he goes, well, why don't you tell me about it? And so basically he explains the dream to him, and in the dream it says there was a grapevine in front of, this is the wine steward, or the cup, I'm sorry, the cupbearer, or same thing. Well, no, he goes from wine steward to cupbearer, I guess. Or if that's the same responsibility. Cupbearer's fantasy. Yeah. Okay, in my dream there was a grapevine in front of me, and there were 3 branches on it. And as soon as the leaves came out, the blossoms appeared and the grapes ripened. I was holding the king's cup. So I took the grapes and squeezed them into the cup and gave it to him. Okay, so basically he's telling him that, Joseph's telling him, look, what it means is that the 3 branches are 3 days, okay? And in 3 days, the king's going to release you, and he's going to pardon you, and he's going to restore you to your position. You will give him the cup as you did before when you were his wine steward. But please remember that everything's going to go well for you, so, kind of look out for me. I'm kind of stuck in here in prison, and I didn't do it. I didn't do anything wrong. Just, all right? And so, like, the next now, the chief baker, he's sitting there, and he's overhearing, like, oh, wow, so he heard, a good interpretation, for him. So he's like, heck, maybe I can get some, some good stuff. He heard a favorable answer, right? So he's like, oh, I had a dream too. And he tells him he was carrying 3 baskets on his head. This is the chief baker. And on top of the baskets were all kinds of baked goods for the king. And then the birds came down and were eating them. I'm saying the birds were eating them. Joseph answered, this is what it means. The 3 days, 3 baskets are 3 days. And in 3 days, the king will release you and have your head cut off. And then he will hang your body on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh. So on his birthday, 3 days later, that's pretty much what happened. So we know from Scripture that birds are a representation of like demonic, because a lot of animals all have spiritual representation, and birds are a representation of demonic forces, right? So that's just a good little thing for you. Can go check that out yourself. There's some representation of birds being demonic in Luke, which we're reading. I think it was in Luke 15. Probably you can check that out. Anyways, so in Genesis 41. Now a few years have passed, and basically the king of Egypt, everything's going pretty good, I guess. But he has this dream, right? And he has a specific dream. In this dream, it says here, he's standing. Okay, he had a dream. He was standing by the Nile River, and when 7 cows, fat, sleek, and sleek, came up out of the river and began to feed on the grass. Then 7 other cows came up. They were thin and bony. They came and stood by the other cows on the river bank, and the thin cows ate up the fat cows. Then the king woke up and fell asleep again and had another dream. 7 heads of grain, full and ripe, were growing on one stalk. Then 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the desert wind, and the thin heads of grain swallowed up the full ones. The king woke up and realized that he had been dreaming. In the morning he was worried, so he sent out for all the magicians and the wise men of Egypt. And he told them all this dream, but no one could explain them, right? So during this time, he has this wicked dream. It's pretty awesome, right? He doesn't understand what it means. And then he asks for all his people, all his wise people, intelligent, to come and see if they can interpret the dream. And no one does, and no one can be able to interpret it for him. So he, the wine steward's, still, giving him wine. He was the one that was in jail or prison with Joseph. So he remembers, he's like, I have to confess, I've done wrong. A few years ago, there was a person who interpreted a dream for me that said that, hey, there would be 3 days and you would restore me in my position and you would kill the other guy that was in the prison with me, the baker, right? And it happened just as he said. So basically after that, the king sent for Joseph, right? Because he wanted to get this dream interpreted. And so from that point on, Joseph, he's brought from prison, and he's shaved, he's changed, he's made look nice because he's going in front of the king. Then the king tells him, I have a dream. Can you explain it to me? I've been told that you can interpret dreams. And if you notice right away in Genesis 41:16, Joseph answered, I cannot, your majesty, but God who gave a favorable interpretation. So right then and there, I love it. He doesn't take any personal, this isn't me, this is God. I love that how he just took it straight to God, right? He took no, what's the word I want to use? He took no honor in being the one that could interpret it. He gave glory to God and everything to do it. So that just shows, Joseph has some great qualities, because when it came time for him, when he could have blown himself up and been like, yeah, no, he took it to God. He said, no, it ain't me, it's God. If God, decides he wants to give you an answer, he will. He's the only one who can. And that's pretty awesome. And so the king tells him the dream that he had, right? And so during, that dream, so pretty much Joseph says, he says, okay, I understand what the dream, I have a pretty good idea what the dream means, right? Or he tells her, I can interpret it for you. The two dreams mean the same thing. God has told you what he is going to do. The 7 fat cows are 7 years, and the 7 full heads of grain are also 7 years. They have the same meaning. The 7 thin cows, which came up later, in the 7 thin heads of grain, scorched by the desert wind, are 7 years of famine. It is just as I told you. God has shown you what he is going to do. There will be 7 years of great plenty in all the land of Egypt, right? After that there will be 7 years of famine, and all the good years will be forgotten because the famine will ruin the country, right? And so then he pretty much tells them, look, there's going to be plenty of time plenty, but the famine which follows is going to be so terrible that it's going to overdo. No one's going to remember all the time of plenty, right? So now he's telling Joseph's, being humble. It's like, now you should place someone in charge who's wise and who's insightful, to basically, in charge of the country, and order them to collect all the food during the good years that are coming, and give them authority to store up grains in the cities and guard it. He wants you to make a reservation of a fifth of each and every, take a fifth of the crops during the 7 years of plenty. Yep. So he wants you to just basically store it up and then guard it and everything like that. The king's like, well, and all the officials approve. They're like, yeah, hey, that's a pretty good plan, sounds good to me. And we'll never find a better man than Joseph, the king says, especially who's obviously filled with God's Spirit. So the king says to him, God has shown you, great favor. So, obviously, there's no one wiser or more insightful than you. And he puts him in charge of all the country, right? And so at this point, he points him second to command, only under the the Pharaoh, right? So pretty much he gives him he takes his little royal ring and gives it with the seal on it and puts it on Joseph's finger, and he gives him the second best chariot and all the lands, and then he gives him a little bit of some guards. He gives him an Egyptian name, he gives him an Egyptian wife. So over this time, Joseph's doing what he says. He was 30 years old when he began service to the king of Egypt, and he started out like that, right? He started doing all the collecting and storing in each of the cities, and he grabbed food from all the fields around it. There was so much grain that Joseph stopped measuring it, and it was like the sand of the sea. Before the years of famine came, Joseph, he had 2 sons, right? So the Egyptian wife that was granted to him, he got, he had two kids with her. And so, after the 7 years of plenty that the land of Egypt enjoyed came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every other country, but there was food throughout Egypt. When the Egyptians began to be hungry, they cried out to the king for food. So he ordered them to go to Joseph and do what he told them. And the famine grew worse and worse and spread over the whole country. So Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. People came to Egypt from all over the world to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. So pretty much, the interpretation, he interpreted it. It was accurate, and it went according to his interpretation. He got promoted to second in command over everyone at the known world at that time, and everything had to go through him. And then the famine hits, and then boom, it was exactly like I said. And that's Genesis 41. Let's see. So we're going to 16. Luke. All right. So this one's about basically the shrewd manager. So Jesus talks to his disciples. There was once a rich man who had a servant who managed his property. The rich man was told that the manager was wasting his master's money. So he called him in and said, "What is this I hear about you? Turn in a complete account of your handling of my property, because you cannot be my manager any longer." The servant said to himself, "My master is going to dismiss me from my job. What shall I do? I am not strong enough to dig ditches, and I am ashamed to beg. Now I know what I will do. Then when my job is gone, I shall have friends who will welcome me in their homes." So he called in all the people who were in debt to his master. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe the master?" 100 barrels of olive oil. He answered, "Here is your account." The manager told him, "Sit down and write 50. Right? So he's pretty much stealing, it looks like. Then he asked another one, "How much do you owe?" He said, 1,000 bushels of wheat. He says, "Okay, here's your account now. Write down 800. Right? So he's knocking him down. Apparently he's stealing. He's being dishonest. I guess he's trying to gain favor with these guys. 'Cause it didn't say he's taking it. He's just saying that he's lowering their account with them so he can gain favor with these guys, right? Because because the people of this world were so much more shrewd in handling their affairs than the people who belong to the light. Jesus went on to say that I tell you, make friends for yourself with worldly, make friends, and so I tell you, make friends for yourselves with worldly wealth, so that when it gives out, you will be welcomed in the eternal home. Whoever is faithful in the small matters will be faithful in the large matters. Whoever is dishonest in the small matters will be dishonest in the large one. And that's true. And if you're in, if you know anyone around you that just little small lie, man, if there's a little small white lie, well, they're lying about a lot. Lying, they steal just a little bit, then they're stealing. They're willing to steal a lot. It's their character. You know what I mean? And it shows through their actions, and then just the smallest details. We can see who people are and pay attention. Right? So if then you have not been fulfilled or faithful in handling worldly wealth, how can you be trusted with true wealth? And if you have not been faithful what belonged to someone else, who will give you what belongs to you? No servant can be slave of two masters. Such a slave will hate one and love the other, and be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Okay, next one's in. It talks about when the Pharisees heard all this. They're pretty. They started making fun of Jesus. They love money. Said, you are the ones that make yourselves look right in other people's sight, but God knows your heart. For the things that are considered of great value, but people are worth nothing in God's sight. The laws of Moses and the writings of the prophets were in effect up to the time of John the Baptist. Since then, the good news about the kingdom of God has been told, and everyone forces their way in. But it is easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the smallest detail of the law to be done away with. Any man who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and any man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery, right? So, it goes to tell you right then and there's some adultery right there. Be careful when it comes to marriage. Marriage is, pretty important. The Rich Man and Lazarus. So I love this little parable right here. It gives you a lot of understanding when it comes to hell, because this is, the interpretation of hell. There was once a rich man who dressed in the most expensive clothes and lived in great luxury every day. There was also a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who used to be brought to the rich man's door, hoping to eat bits of food that fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to sit beside Abram at the feast in heaven. The rich man died and was buried, and in Hades, where he was in a great plain, he looked up and saw Abram far away with Lazarus at his side. So he called out, Father Abraham, take pity on me and send Lazarus to dip some water and cool off my tongue, because I am in great pain in this fire, right? Well, in other interpretations, it talks about heaven right here, that the angels carried him by and set him beside Abram at the feast in heaven, right? But we're at this time before Christ had came down. This was prior to Christ, so this was okay. So it was Sheol, Hades, and Gehenna, right? Those are the different areas that are down in hell, and paradise was actually okay. So you have obviously there's it tells you right here that there's a pit. Okay, I didn't get to that one yet. But Abram said, remember, son, as in your lifetime you were given all the good things, while Lazarus got all the bad things, but now he's enjoying himself. While you are in pain, besides all that, there is a deep pit lying between us, so that those who want to cross over from here to there cannot do so, nor can anyone cross from where you are to here, right? Okay, so there's a chasm, it says, a pit, right? That's crossing between where Abraham, okay, and this guy Lazarus is, to where that rich man is, right? Who's in Hades. So Hades is, hell and all that stuff. It tells you in the Bible is in the earth, down beneath us, right? And so during that time, there's this chasm where there would be considered or a pit that where everyone who died who didn't go to heaven, because no one could go to heaven except through Christ. So Christ hadn't came down, so no one knew him yet, and so they were still sentenced down to, I guess it was called paradise at that time. And so now, they're sitting over here with Abraham, because Abraham's there. Abraham was, obviously, he's one of the old guys in the Old Testament, right? So he sat Abraham. Abraham was the the head of Jacob and Israel, and Israel and all that good stuff. So you got, obviously he's sitting right there saying, look, with him. So he's in paradise down there, and now you got Lazarus, who's telling him, he's asking Lazarus to dip some finger in water and cool off my tongue, right? So now you're telling him there's pain in this fire. I'm in great pain and fire. So wherever he's at, wherever this selfish, rich man is. There's pain, there's fire, and he's thirsty, right? So you got a lot of negative traits going on right here. But Abraham said, "Remember, my son, it is in your lifetime you were given all good things, right?" And so, you got a lot going on right there. That gives you a good understanding of what hell's going to be like. There's pain, there's fire. You know what I'm saying? I imagine fire ain't going to be good. He's thirsty. It's hot. You got a lot. You got a lot of references right there. So they went to the cross. There's a cross over here. Cannot do so. The rich man said, "Then I beg you, Father Abraham, send Lazarus to my father's house, where I have 5 brothers. Let him go and warn them, so that they at least will not come to this place of pain." Abraham said, "Your brothers have Moses and the prophets to warn them, and your brothers should listen to what they say." The rich man answered, "That is not enough, Father Abraham. If someone were to raise from the dead and go to them, they would turn from their sins." But Abraham said, "If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced, even if someone else were to raise from the dead." So, obviously they know what they're doing. So, it doesn't matter if a family member dies, comes back. If they're not willing and open-minded to be listening to the gospel or at least to what the prophets or anyone had to say, then there's nothing that can do it. There's just nothing they can do about it. It's their own will in that regard. So, those who have eyes see, those who have ears listen. Or those who have eyes, yeah. Anyways, I'm JC with God Talk. God bless, and see you soon.